Now, if you're wondering what happened to my guitar strap, well, this came with a guitar strap, but apparently it's for literal infants, so I gotta play it like a bazooka. They didn't even do the courtesy of giving me a string that I could tie to the guitar strap to make it longer. No, they just assumed that if I'm playing a 300 guitar, I must be 3.5 years old. So King Charles, he's got the drip. He's decked out. Woo! I only just found out that Moaning Myrtle, can you believe this? Moaning Myrtle was 35. What? I mean, I guess it makes sense if you're casting a ghost who's supposed to not age. You cast an adult to play a child, but she's so convincing as like a 12-year-old. Let me just show you this guitar strap, because I gotta at least show it. I don't understand what they were thinking not including a string to make it longer.
It's time for the RAB Roundup!
First of all, let's acknowledge, is that not the cutest thumbnail you have ever seen? I've been getting better at my thumbnail game lately because I hate making thumbnails. I've always hated it. It's a pain. And so I thought, well, what do? How do I make this any easier on myself? So I went back and looked at all of my thumbnails, and I saw one that looked really aesthetically pleasing. It was this one, Queenie Dead Mr. Girl Band. The colors, the way I was situated right in the spot with the black and the white, and how it's perfect. And so I thought, well, I'll just copy that now. And so that's what I'm doing. That's going to make it easier for me to make good thumbnails. And they're not annoying thumbnails like most YouTubers do. They look okay, and they're easy to make. The first thing on my mind today is the first thing on my mind every day: Steven Crowder. I don't consider myself a very religious man, but there is one sense in which I am. I like to pray every single morning. I get down on my knees in front of my bed and pray to God that Steven Crowder dies horribly and painfully today. And I will pretty much do whatever God wants to accomplish that. And if it turns out that God is not as great as other people claim he is, then maybe Satan will do it for me instead. But today is a day for celebration because Steven Crowder might not be dead, but he at least is suffering. Some footage was recently leaked. By whom is my question, but some footage was recently leaked, let's not ask any questions, of Steven Crowder appearing to verbally abuse his very visibly pregnant wife on their luxurious $1 million patio.
You are not taking the car. No, because if you refuse to do wifely things, then I will go pick up the groceries.
There's no groceries. I would have to.
Steaks, wood pellets, my grill. I know it's an unreasonable request, but I'll go do it. How about you first? Hillary, how do you respect the man? Yeah, other than that, other than that, you see love of that.
Respect.
No, other than that, no, you're not taking the car.
Steven,
You're not taking the car.
Steven,
You are not
then
taking
I will ask them to pick me up. Would you like me to ask?
Oh, that's right.
It's not about Steven.
Give it an Uber.
Okay, Steven, I can't.
You want to walk out right now? Listen to me. I can't go to the gym. I can't go to my parents. I can't call my friends. I can't be home. You're going to take the car and leave me here. Hillary, just think of how boxed in you've made me.
This just confirms what I've believed for years, which is that Steven Crowder is a completely unlikable person with absolutely no redeeming qualities. Except for maybe his good looks. I don't know, recently he's been cultivating a bit of that beard, and he's got those huge muscles that just bulge out of his shirt whenever he's on his show. I guess his general dopey arrogance kind of mars a bit of that, but he's still got enough going on that it kind of works. And that's probably the only reason his wife married him in the first place. What's really stand out about this video, though, is that Steven Crowder doesn't have more than one car. Look at this house that he lives in. I mean, this is clearly a multi-million-dollar house, and he doesn't have more than one car? The only explanation for this is that he only has one car just so that he can guilt trip his wife about using the car when he doesn't want her to. Which just adds a whole other layer of scumminess to this rancid human being's character. And like I said last time on the RAB, actually no, it wasn't last time, it was the time before last time on the RAB Roundup, I said that Steven Crowder's subreddit, Louder with Crowder, is now banned, which means the only Steven Crowder subreddit left is one called Steven Crowder, which is kind of like the Dave Rubin subreddit, where it's just a bunch of people making fun of how much of a retard Dave Rubin is.
As most of you probably have already seen, we followed up our chat with Peterson and Shapiro with the brothers Weinstein, Eric and Brett. It was their first public appearance together ever, and I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Hit us again. Come on, go. I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
When did he say that? Was that recent?
It's kind of the same thing. It's just a bunch of people hating on Steven Crowder, which I like. I like the fact that the only subreddit the guy has left is the one his haters use. But it's not even just that subreddit that's turned against him. Even r/conservative is having posts about Steven Crowder now, where the majority of the comments seem pretty negative. Even a lot of conservatives are now turning against Steven Crowder. Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire and Candace Owens. But the one crowd of people who seems to have not quite turned against him are, of course, the Young Turks viewers. Because the Young Turks audience is so just doggedly right-wing that they can't even... You can tell that this is testing them. You can tell, like, they're not super gung-ho about this, but they still feel the need to stand up for Steven Crowder anyway, even though the video just proves that he's abusive and horrible and should have never been born. He should have been aborted. They're like,
Well, I guess it just kind of looks like a regular argument to me. People have fights all the time.
like, they really want to hate the Young Turks. This isn't about Steven Crowder, by the way. This is about how much they hate the Young Turks. So in order to hate the Young Turks, they have to defend Steven Crowder, even though they really don't want to. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. And, oh, just the best news in the world. They're getting a divorce. Nothing could be a bigger blow to this man's ego than his own wife divorcing him because of how much she hates him. And that's what's happening. And it just, it makes me weep tears of beauty. And what's more, he made this video where he was saying that he thinks that it should be illegal for his wife to divorce him.
And no, this was not my choice. My then wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. And in the state of Texas, that is completely permitted.
How much more pathetic could you get? Oh, wait, you can get more pathetic. Because Steven Crowder, this isn't even the lowest he's sunk. Do you remember that one time when Ethan Klein tricked him into debating Sam Cedar, the guy who he'd been dodging for like years? And then as soon as Sam Cedar showed up, he ducked right out of the room. He bailed immediately. Nobody who claims to know what he's talking about should be afraid of debating Sam Cedar. Sam Cedar is not intimidating, and he's not rude either. He's a nerdy little Jewish man who does voices on Bob's Burgers. If you can't handle that, then you're just not intelligent. But not only is Steven Crowder abusive against his wife, he's also abusive against his staff. A lot of reports have been coming out about how he does things like there was a guy on a show named Dave who is actually funnier and smarter than him. And so whenever Dave would start talking, he would actually have a button that he would press that says, "Stop talking, Dave," because that's how much his ego is hurt by the fact that somebody more talented than him is speaking. And there's some really weird stuff too. I'll let Kyle Kalinske explain it.
Steven Crowder ran abusive company and, quote, exposed his genitals to staff, per shocking report.
No, but at the time, you only had 5 employees, and they were all male.
Well, yeah, I know, but it was a Terminator 2 sketch.
I love how he thinks that's a rebuttal. Bro, they were men. Okay. That doesn't mean, like, what, you're now allowed to just put your dick on them or put your balls on them or show your dick for the lulz? Oh, Jesus Christ. But by the way, he's owning up to it. He's like, yeah, no, of course, yeah. And then, as I said, there's always an excuse. Nah, it was the skit, bro. We were doing a skit, and in the skit, it's a matter of necessity that I shove my dick in the general vicinity of my uncomfortable male co-host. Steven, you're not fooling anybody, man. You're not fooling anybody. I'll repeat it one more time. You know who whips out their dick in front of their boys? Somebody who wants their boys to see their dick. Somebody who wants to whip their dick out in front of their boys. That's who does it. That's who does it. By the way, also, Steven Crowder has dressed up like a woman more times than any other, supposedly cis straight man has ever dressed up as a woman. Why does he do that? Because he wants to do that, right? Look, he's clearly struggling with stuff.
Steven Crowder, bi icon? I don't know whether I want to believe it. I recently saw that Super Mario Brothers movie. Your Movie Sucks did a video reviewing it, which was not very good in my opinion, because he spent the whole time talking about, it's a movie for babies, you gotta be a baby to like this movie, and then he was criticizing everyone who was getting offended by him calling it a baby movie, and blah 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 blah.
So I just saw the baby movie, and wow, what a surprise. It was a dumb baby movie for dumb, stupid babies. I'm trying to imagine a single scenario of someone saying that about any movie that I love, even my favorite films of all time, and being actually upset about it.
I mean, here's the thing. Your Movie Sucks is right that Super Mario Brothers is not like a good movie. It doesn't really present any kind of mastery over the film medium. It's not an example of great storytelling in any way. But I think one of his blind spots as a critic is that he doesn't really have an appreciation for the different kinds or purposes of movies in existence. Like, everything to him is kind of boiled down to one category. It's a good movie. If it's a good movie, then it has to meet all of these criteria. Otherwise, it's a bad movie. I think that there are different things for different audiences, for different purposes. So, for instance, the Super Mario Brothers movie is for fans of Super Mario Brothers. It's not really a movie that exists to tell a great story in a creative way. It's a movie that exists to give you all of these, like, little examples of things that you've seen as weird random nonsense in video games that you play, these platforming, eccentric, psychedelic video games. It then combines them all into something that resembles a coherent story, and the novelty in that itself is enough to make it a worthwhile movie and to make it, in my opinion, like a good movie in the sense that it's accomplishing what it's trying to do. It's a movie for fans of Super Mario Brothers. It's not a movie for movie fans. And I know that YMS, I mean, he's not ignorant about Super Mario Brothers. I mean, he's a millennial. He knows the Mario games, and he can. What I'm saying is that I think that our difference of opinion has more to do with his philosophy about movies in general than anything else. But we also see this in other ways with YMS, like he did a video reacting to the Gollum trailer, because there's that Lord of the Rings Gollum video game that's, I guess, gonna come out at some point. Video games, man. Video games. They never come out. until they do, and then everyone forgot they were coming out. But the thing about this game is, yeah, the character models are not great, and the graphics look, not really up to date. But also, it's a lower budget game for a smaller crowd, and so I'm not really looking for some real high quality graphics, high quality character models. And so he was just dunking on this game like, this sucks, this is outdated, this is horrible. But it's like, what do you want? And I had someone try to argue with me that, no, if they can't do really good character models and good graphics with this style, then they should go for a simpler animation style for the game, like a lot of these indie games are doing these days. And while I can kind of understand that in a way, I still think it's a Lord of the Rings game, and they want to make it look like Lord of the Rings. It's not Lego Lord of the Rings. I really don't think that the creative decisions they made in this seem to be all that bad. Just aesthetically, it seems fine. I can play a game from 10 years ago, and it looks like a game from 10 years ago, but that doesn't mean that it was, a bad game. So I guess, I don't know, I'm just not, a snob about video games. I don't even really like video games. But yeah, there's different purposes of video games for different audiences, for what the people are expecting different things when they go into them. I feel the same way about movies. And also there's a mistake that a lot of film critics make where they think just because they didn't like a movie, that makes it a bad movie. And I know that's a weird thing to say, of course, if I didn't like it, then it must be bad, right? Because what other standard are we judging something on by than objective opinion? Or subjective opinion, rather. Because, how do you judge whether something hits or not? Other than just judging whether it hit for you. But I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong, because a lot of the time something just doesn't hit for you, but it hits for so many people. And you might have your reasons for why it doesn't hit for you, but those reasons aren't necessarily going to be more objectively argued and better than other people's reasons for why it hit. So I think there are some movies where they just have so many problems, so many flaws that are very observable that you can point out to where you can argue that something is a bad movie. I'm not saying that there are no such thing as bad movies, but a lot of the times there are movies that have a more mixed response. And a lot of people come out with the impression that they are bad movies when I don't think that's necessarily the case. For instance, I don't like the Charlie Kaufman movie Synecdoche, New York. I saw it very recently just because I thought I might like it more second watch, and I didn't. Nothing that it did worked for me. The humor didn't work for me. The sadness or poignancy of the storytelling didn't work for me. The creativity didn't really work for me. Not even the symbolism really worked. None of it made an emotional impression on me, and I just kind of found the movie gross. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad movie, because I know that a lot of people actually did get so much out of those elements that didn't do anything for me. And when I hear other people talk about that, what they're saying makes sense. It makes sense that they had an emotional response from this or that or the other thing. I just didn't. And so I'm not trying to say that movies are completely subjective and you can't determine what's a good movie and what's a bad movie, that they're just all good because anybody could get anything out of them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that a lot of people are very simplistically minded and unable to put themselves out of their own frame of mind and try to look at a movie from another person's frame of mind. And unless you can do that, you're not really a good film critic. You're an amateur. And a lot of people get a lot of enjoyment out of needlessly hating on movies just because they didn't happen to resonate with them. But again, that's very amateur criticism. Anybody could do that. It takes someone a lot smarter to be able to look at something from another perspective. I put on my fairy lights. I only remember to plug them in just now because I needed to plug in my laptop, and I needed to turn on my power supply, and that just automatically turned on my lights. I'm not a professional YouTuber, man. I don't know how to do this. I forget to even pose for thumbnails. I don't know. I think I posed for a thumbnail like once or twice in my life. Actually, I think the only time was when I did that Alex Day video, and I even said in the video, this is going to be the thumbnail of the video. So yeah, I'm not a professional at this. Who cares? The last thing that I want to be is a professional YouTuber. I mean, it's also kind of the thing I want to be more than anything else. But that's kind of sad. Because a professional YouTuber has to prioritize getting views and getting money, which means he always has to censor himself. He can't use bad words. He has to make ridiculously over-the-top thumbnails like I just described a few minutes ago. A professional YouTuber is a professional attention whore. No thanks. And that kind of gets me to like the whole distinction between PewDiePie and Mr. Beast, because, you know, PewDiePie was #1 on YouTube for years and years and years. It's actually very impressive, the lifespan of his reign at the top. But he never got into YouTube trying to be a professional. He just sort of accidentally became this viral sensation in 2013 for screaming at video games in a way that was entirely unfunny and worthless, and I don't even know why people enjoyed that. But hey, it launched him to success, and then he actually started making good videos where he was talking about like reading philosophy books and Japanese literature, and then he would react to funny videos with his friend, which is also kind of good. Like, I actually think PewDiePie became something really special at one point, and he never really let fame get to his head. The only thing that he let get to his head was the N-word for some reason. I don't know what the hell he was thinking. Yeah, #1 most subscribed YouTuber. You know what I gotta do to really make people like me? Use the N-word. To be clear, I have no problem with the N-word itself. The criticism that I'm lobbing at PewDiePie is the fact that he used the N-word as an insult against someone when he was gaming. I think that should be pretty obvious, but if you don't know the context, that's what I'm talking about. But I feel like I used to do stuff like that too. Like, I would just do stuff that I knew I was going to regret later, and then I'd do it anyway just because I was compulsive. And then when you look back on it, you're like, I knew that that was a bad idea, and there was no reason to do it. I didn't even want to do it, and yet I did it. And now I'm just confused about how that even happened. And a lot of people were confused about why PewDiePie said the N-word. They were always like, why? Why? What was the reason? Why? Some people, actually, I think like half of the people concluded that he was racist, which I think is a leap in logic. Like, just because someone uses the N-word doesn't mean they're racist. But these are the kind of leaps in logic that you make if you don't understand what it's like to be an impulsive idiot. The truth is a lot simpler, you know? The truth is that there was no reason. There was no reason, and that upsets people because people want a reason. They want something to blame, someone to blame for this travesty. And that's why I'm against believing that these things are travesties in the first place. He said the N-word, so what? It's not like he did anything. But that's PewDiePie. And then Mr. Beast comes along, and he kind of partly on the back of PewDiePie's fame due to the whole T-Series phenomenon, Mr. Beast comes in and just totally eclipses everyone. But Mr. Beast is such a different beast than PewDiePie, because Mr. Beast is all about, I'm gonna be the biggest YouTuber. I mean, that was his thing ever since he was like 11 years old, starting up his YouTube channel. He just wanted the attention. He wanted to be good at the gig of making videos and getting views. And he devoted his whole life to it. I mean, he was not this guy deserves the spot more than anyone else because he's the one who's fought the hardest in his life to get there. And you know what? He's also a pretty good person. He has a lot of humility and he has a lot of generosity. But he just arrived at this spot in a totally different way. He arrived at as the professional product-based YouTuber, whereas PewDiePie is the amateur personality-based YouTuber. So it's just a difference in philosophies, and I think it's very indicative of the way YouTube has changed, that kind of creator just isn't really a thing anymore the way it used to be. Now it's the Mr. Beast YouTubers. It's the people who treat it like it's a business. Just something to think about. So the other night I had this dream where I found out about this bar next to where I work. And I went into the bar. It was completely empty. It was a very nice looking place. There were no like tables or anything. It was just a bar. Just a bar. And I went in and sat down, and the bartenders there for some reason were wearing those 50s diner soda jerk boat hats. I don't know what those things are called, but for some reason they were wearing those. This one bartender, he's like in his 40s, comes up to me. He's like, "What do you want?" And I say, "I'll have a dry gin." And he goes, "Do you want blah, blah, blah?" And he said this word. I think it began with a C. I can't remember. It was a very distinct word, and I know it was a real, like, distinct word because I repeated it back to him, asking him what that was. I didn't know what it was. I can't remember what the word was. It was like something my brain invented. And he was, I was like, "What's that?" And he was like, "How brown do you want it?" I'm guessing my brain was thinking of like dirty gin, how you put some sort of a mixer in it and it makes it kind of brown or grayish. But I was just like, "Give it to me clear." So then the other bartender who's making my drink, he is completely naked, right? He looks like he's about the same age as the other guy, and he's totally emaciated. He looks like a Holocaust victim. But he is wearing the same hat. And then the naked bartender gives me my drink. I'm like, "Thanks." I'm drinking it. Naked bartender walks a few feet away, and I start talking to the other bartender. I say, "Doesn't he ever wear any clothes?" And the bartender's like, "I know, dude. He's driving all the business away. Nobody wants to come here." And then probably the least interesting part of the dream, because this is just like dream stuff. Elijah Wood and Sean Astin from Lord of the Rings walk in. I have a brief conversation with them. But then another interesting thing happens, which is I find that I'm starting to feel weird. Like I just drank a bunch of caffeine. And then I look in my hand, and instead of a gin, I am holding this empty can of energy drink. So apparently I just drank a whole energy drink, and I had no knowledge of it. But I've been having a lot of these very vivid and also kind of consistent dreams lately, where like instead of it just shifting from one weird image identified with a nonsensical phenomenon to another, it's like actual stories are playing out in a way that actually kind of makes a little bit of sense. And the reason I've been having these dreams is because I have this disease where if I eat any sugar, starch, it'll keep me up at night. And so I've been taking melatonin every night to go to sleep. And melatonin will really put you in a deep sleep and give you these really intense dreams. But then every once in a while, it won't really put me to sleep. If I eat too much of what I'm not supposed to have, it will actually conflict with the melatonin, where it'll just put me in this state of mind where I'm half awake and half asleep, and I'm having these horrible, vivid, like extremely vivid dreams, and yet the reality is still so bent and off and not right that it just feels bad. But one thing I like about dreaming is that I'm not the same person in my dreams that I am in real life. In real life, I'm very inhibited and shy and awkward, and I don't like talking to people. Whereas in dreams, I just do whatever I want, say whatever I want, and anything happens, and I just feel like I'm in charge of my own life. So I've been really enjoying dreaming lately a lot more than being awake. So I use Reddit a lot. It's the only social media other than YouTube that I like. I don't use any other social media. I really detest it. I find it boring. It's just so boring. Like, I don't care about people. I find people just so dull. But I like Reddit because you can just have conversations about stuff that you're interested in, and most of the people there are idiots, but I like talking to idiots as long as I don't have to look at them in the face or be in the same room as them. If I can shut my computer screen and they no longer exist, then I'm okay with talking to them, because sometimes it's fun to talk to an idiot, but Reddit is just full of them. Reddit is just like idiots galore. And there's really only 3 subreddits that I frequent. One of them is r/deepfatfried, which is for fans of The Amazing Atheist, basically. Another is r/Marilyn Manson, for fans of Marilyn Manson. And the third one is r/Fascism Reclaimed, which is the only fascist subreddit that has managed to stick around on Reddit. And the reason it has managed to stick around for so long is because r/Fascism Reclaimed is extremely anti-racist, anti-LGBT. Like, they do not tolerate any, like, hate toward gay people or trans people or whatever, and especially anti-Semitism. Those moderators despise anti-Semitism. They might tolerate people like being kind of anti-gay as long as their speech isn't like super overtly hateful, but they will not tolerate any anti-Jewish. In fact, I once requested to be able to post on that subreddit, because you have to ask the moderators to be able to post there. I once requested to be able to post there because I wanted to post my fascism video there to just see what people thought of it, see if they had any criticisms for me. And they wouldn't even let me in because I was too anti-Semitic for them, even though I don't really consider myself anti-Semitic at all.
That's what they all say.
But you have to be so anti-Semitic to post on there. Like, you can't really have any criticisms of Jewish people whatsoever. So they didn't even let me in. I just find it interesting that there is a fascist subreddit that is so anti-hate speech. And they have to be, because otherwise they'll get banned from Reddit. So this is what they have to do in order to survive there. But they're not just doing it because they want to survive on the platform. They're also doing it because the whole mission statement of this subreddit is to rescue fascism from hatred. Because believe it or not, there is a significant amount of people who identify as fascists and yet denounce all of the prejudice and bigotry associated with fascism. Some of these people even claim that this is the true fascism, that the bigoted form of fascism is the perversion of fascism, the undermining of fascism. There are even people on this subreddit who identify as fascists but are not really authoritarians. They're actually Democrats. And they consider Mussolini to really be what killed fascism. Mussolini is the enemy of his own movement that he started. Because these people are followers of Giovanni Gentile. And apparently, according to them, Giovanni Gentile had very different ideas about what fascism meant and about what totalitarianism meant than Mussolini and what fascism later became under him. Even though Mussolini was technically the creator of the fascist movement, Giovanni Gentile was the philosopher of fascism, and he defined a lot of the doctrine of fascism. And Mussolini was so inconsistent with his ideology. He was such an opportunist, and he really apparently didn't believe in anything. The only thing that Mussolini really appears to have believed in was himself. And so I kind of see him like a 1920s version of Vladimir Putin. Because I really see the war in Ukraine with Vladimir Putin as him just trying to create a legacy for himself in his old age. I see it as that a lot more than anything else. I mean, yeah, he's a far-right bigot, and so he has these sort of nostalgic ideas about what Ukraine means. But in the end, it's not really about anything. It's not really about the ideas that he took from Dugin, who took them from a bunch of other people who are less well known. It's not about Russian fascism, really. It's not about Russian lawlessness. It's not about Russian Orthodox Christianity. I really just think it's about him. And that's how I see Mussolini as well. And so I can understand why people who take the philosophy of fascism seriously would think that Mussolini was the worst person who possibly could have advocated for it, or the worst person to lead that kind of movement because he didn't actually have any real beliefs. And he was an intelligent person. He was no idiot. Believe me. I mean, Mussolini was a very smart guy. I just don't think that he had any genuine beliefs. He was an atheist who supported the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, that should tell you a lot. But I'd be interested in learning more about the early fascism of 1919 and even 1918. Because, as I pointed out in my video, it had a strikingly different character from what it became, and I would really like, when I get around to talking about fascism in later videos, to really explore just what it was that they believed then, and the mixture of different beliefs that they had then, and how it kind of coalesced into something that a lot of people who were in the movement at first were not ultimately comfortable with. But what you'll notice when perusing this Fascism Reclaimed subreddit is that while there are these people who seriously want to reclaim fascism, and there are people who have these sort of like orthodox sort of like actual idealist philosophies and stuff that are maybe fascist adjacent but not really fascist, there are also just, I think most of the people there are what you might expect to find there. And the reason I know this is because under most of the threads there are a lot of comments removed by the moderators, which really I think proves the point that this whole idea that these guys have of reclaiming the idea of fascism, I don't think it can ever work, because I think fascism is always going to attract the people who you don't want to attract with a kind of message like this. It's always going to attract the racists and the anti-Semites. I don't think that there really is any possible way of separating fascism from those people, despite all of the PR that has been attempted around fascism for so many years. I mean, I think David Frost explained it really well when Oswald Mosley went on his show.
Now, in all of this, you've been going on about all of this, and you've been dealing with the various points that have come out. But now, you are saying absolutely definitely that anybody who was guilty of anti-Semitism was expelled from your party and so on. How can you possibly say that as if you expect people to believe it, when everybody who watched the events of the 30s, whoever you talk to, knows and associates your party totally with racial hatred and anti-Semitism? Either what you're saying is not true, or you were the most ineffectual, put upon, unable to impose his leadership on a party leader that has ever been seen.
Let me answer. That's a quite false dilemma. We were in a fight I should not expel every man who was fighting with Jews in the street, particularly if they attacked us with razors and other weapons. We were in a fight. That's why we wore uniform, in order to deal with men like this who broke up our meetings by organized violence. And of course I would not expel black shirts who fought Jews in the street when they were attacked by Jews. What I would expel is a man who went around saying that we should deal with all Jews in a horrible fashion, ill-treat them or bully them. Not at all. We were fighting Jews for one reason, to stop a war with Germany. As an ex-serviceman of the First War in air and trenches, I was determined to stop another war if I possibly could.
And this is a criticism that Mosley didn't really have a response for, because it's like, what can you even say about it? Mosley was a double talker who, on one side of his mouth, claimed that he was against anti-Semitism and racialism, as he called it, and on the other side of his mouth, he did everything that he could to attract those people to his movement in order to ostensibly keep Great Britain out of World War II. And later in life, you would frame this as a desperate measure for desperate times, but I don't really believe him, because so much of his rhetoric, even after World War II, paid lip service to things like, I don't know, apartheid in South Africa, or the kind of problems that Enoch Powell was riling people against in the 60s, where you had all this immigration to the United Kingdom, like Jamaican immigrants coming to London. And so there was always this kind of confusion in Mosley's rhetoric about, like, what does he mean when he says that he's anti-racist, because it seems like everything he believes in is pro-racist. And so that's how I kind of see this Fascism Reclaimed subreddit. I just don't think that there's any way to separate out fascism and racism. I think they're always going to go together. They're always going to coalesce. And so if you want something like your imagination of the perfect fascism that isn't racist, I think that you're going to have to look somewhere else. I think you're going to have to divorce yourself from the word fascist altogether, or even the word nationalist. It's not, when I say it's a fascist subreddit, it is, but it's, there's a lot of diversity in the kind of people you find there. It's not just fascists hanging out there. It's not even just right-wingers hanging out there. There's a lot of left-wing people, liberals, stuff like that. But what we all have in common is that we are interested in this subject, and we're not trying to banish the discourse around it. And as subreddits go, it's a pretty friendly subreddit when it comes to having disagreements, because there's such a diversity of people there. You can have a disagreement with people and nobody's going to freak out about it. And if you do freak out about it, you get banned by the moderators, or at least your comments get deleted. So they encourage actual good discourse over there, which I like. So a while back, I was watching the TV show I, Claudius, which is a fantastic TV show. I absolutely loved pretty much everything about it. And one of the things that's very striking about I, Claudius when you watch it is that it's very, very funny. I mean, you don't imagine like some masterpiece theater period drama about ancient Rome is gonna be hilarious, but there are just so many laugh out loud moments in this show. And these characters have so much charisma and so much wit and so many vibrant personalities that clash against each other in these really amazing ways. A lot of that is aided by the fact that they have so many great actors in the show. You have Derek Jacobi and Patrick Stewart, John Rhys Davies, John Hurt, Brian Blessed, the blessed god of acting. In fact, when I play Dungeons and Dragons, I just do a Brian Blessed impression. That is my character. But then, you know, after watching I, Claudius, I got to thinking about this, and I got to thinking about that movie that came out a few years ago called The Death of Stalin, which was this kind of farcical take on what it was like in the inner circle of the Communist Party as Stalin was dying and after he died. And what I realized is that I want to see more historical movies, but I don't want to see them the way they've been done lately. I think that recent examples of historical movies have been pretty pathetic. They're boring, they're all gray and serious. Although I did like The King, the one about Henry V, starring Timothée Chalamet, and I thought that one was a good movie. But still, the style, it's not nearly as interesting as the historical movies that they used to make back in the day, the like historical epic era of filmmaking. And I think that we need a new version of that. We need a new like trend of historical movies that can be good. And I'm someone who really believes that historical accuracy matters in movies. I think that it's always so much better and more immersive when a movie portrays something in a way that doesn't use like anachronisms or cliches that are not period authentic, that when they are at their best, they really do their best to actually get everything right, down to the little details. But what I've realized is that the next wave of historical movies needs to follow this farcical comedy pattern. And it doesn't have to be super farcical, like super off the wall crazy. It can be pretty grounded, like I, Claudius was pretty grounded. Even The Death of Stalin was pretty grounded for what it was. But what it needs is a sense of humor. I think that's what's missing from a lot of historical movies. And what I really like about that is that there's this kind of knowingness on the part of the author of the film, the what do you call it, a screenplay, right? The writer. There's this knowingness that isn't imparted in the text. It's in the subtext. And the knowingness says that history is ridiculous. So much crazy nonsense happened in history. And that's so much of the fun of history, is learning just how crazy people are and the lengths that people will go for stupid reasons and how everything is able to get so out of control. And what I like about these funny historical dramas, you can kind of call them that. They're either historical comedies or they're funny historical dramas, because there is a lot of drama in them. But they don't take the subject matter too seriously, and that actually makes the subject matter more interesting as a result. Because you get this kind of bird's eye God view of the situation and realize how ridiculous it is. And so I would like to see a few more of these movies, and I have a set of proposals for you about what movies I would like to see. And my proposals kind of all revolve around the same thing that The Death of Stalin did and that I, Claudius did. Because both of these films, I guess you can call I, Claudius a film, even though it's a TV show, but both of them are about power struggles. They're about something getting displaced, and then a bunch of people scramble together to try to wrest power from each other. And lots of crazy things happen as a result of it. So I think that's where the comedy of history really lies. And so in order to capture that, I have a few proposals for historical comedy movies that could be really fun to see on screen. The first of them is The Year of the Four Emperors. This was 69 AD. Emperor Nero killed himself in 68. That can be the start of the movie, is seeing Emperor Nero's totally pathetic attempt to save his own dynasty, resulting in his suicide. That could be pretty funny. There's also a story I remember about how Nero tried to convince his slave to kill himself to see how it's done. And the slave is like, man, nobody likes you. Nobody's going to do this for you. You're done. Just kill yourself and get it over with. And then you see how in the course of 1 year, these 4 different emperors come up, and they all die in various ways. Except for the last one, of course, Vespasian, and he then starts his own dynasty. But there's a lot of space there for comedy and different characters with, like, surprises and, double crosses, stabs in the back. There's a lot of that stuff going on, and it could be a really funny story. And then, if that movie's a big hit, we can do the sequel, The Year of the Five Emperors. This is after, what's his name? Commodus dies. And the Year of the Five Emperors is really the Year of the Three Emperors, because only 3 people actually became emperor during that period. But there were 2 usurpers who got pretty far, named, I think, Albinus and Niger, which, by the way, mean white and black, which is kind of interesting. But we can follow all these guys, and my favorite of them is, of course, Didius Julianus, the guy who bought the empire on auction and then immediately regretted it. That could be a hilarious arc in the story. Another movie I would like to see is 1066, which was the year when 3 different princes were all trying to take the throne of England for themselves. You had 2 guys named Harold. A lot of comedy could come out of that. Harold Godwinson from Wessex and Harald Hardrada from Norway. Or is it Hardrauda? I've never actually seen it written in Old Norse.
Apparently it's actually pronounced Haraldur Hardraudi.
And then, of course, William the Conqueror, who's the victor in the end. But yeah, the whole idea of competing personalities who all have their own distinct ways, their own distinct ways of reacting to various bits of news, and then they all fight each other. I mean, it's a recipe for good comedy. I recently watched the movie Inside Llewyn Davis. My dad recommended it to me because I'm a big fan of folk music, and it was really good. It's about a folk singer in 1961 who is in Greenwich Village, and what's interesting is that he's not a mediocre folk singer. He's actually pretty good, but there are 100 other guys in town who are as good as him, so he doesn't really stand out in any way. And his life doesn't change in any way. The movie starts out exactly the same as it finishes. And throughout the movie, you kind of wonder if he's burning all these bridges in Greenwich Village with people he's never going to be able to get into their good graces anymore. But then at the end of the movie, you find out that, oh no, they just recognize that he's sad because his partner in his duo group killed himself. And so they're kind of cutting him some slack. And it's Llewyn. It's Llewyn. He gets mad sometimes, and they put up with it in the end, which is interesting because he can be pretty mean and unlikable, but still, I mean, they've known him for a long time, and they know what they're getting into, basically. And that felt very real. That felt. And there isn't a big fanfare about how, he's making amends with them and it's all emotional. There's nothing like that. They're just kind of like one day he comes back. He's like, yeah, can I crash here? And they're like, yeah, I guess so. This movie has a lot of folk music in it, and some of it I recognize because it's British or Irish folk music, the stuff that I'm more interested in. Shoals of Herring Shoals of Herring is a song that's really important in the movie because it's a song that he used to like playing with his dad. And that also happens to be one of my favorite Scottish ballads written by Ewan MacColl. I remember just being entranced by the Corey Folk Trio rendition of it that they recorded in, I believe it was 1964, which is 3 years after this movie takes place.
Now the work was hard and the hours were long, and the treatment surely took some burden. There was little kindness and the kicks were many, as we hunted for the shoals of Herring.
And then there's the Auld Triangle, which is a song that I know from the Dubliners, who were also around at that time. And in this movie, it's sung by this group of guys who are dressed in a way that very clearly and intentionally is meant to mimic the Clancy brothers with their beige knitted sweaters. I like that. It's a little nod for people who are in the know about folk music. I mean, a lot of people in especially the British folk music at that time were kind of dressing like that. Like, I think the Corey Folk Trio did wear sweaters too, but that specific beige look with the combed hair, that to me feels very intentionally signaling Clancy Brothers, and especially because they're singing an Irish song. I think it's an Irish song, although it has the word auld in it, like from the Robert Burns song Auld Lang Syne, which is Scottish, so maybe it's Scottish. I think it's Irish, though.
A hungry feeling came o'er me stealing. All the mice were squealing in my prison cell, and the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal.
Let me just look it up. I gotta do my research on this. Okay, apparently it is Irish. So I was right. And the one other song that I knew comes at the very end when Bob Dylan sings The Leaving of Liverpool. That's another one I know from that same album that had Shills of Herring.
So fare ye well, my own true love. When I return, united we will be. It's not the leaving of Liverpool that grieves me, but my darling, when I think on thee.
And it's another great song, but it's a very interesting ending because Llewyn Davis, he has had no success for this whole movie, and that's kind of the point of the movie. But then right at the end, he's leaving the club just as Bob Dylan comes and sits down on the stool that he was just sitting in and performs Leaving of Liverpool. And this, of course, is 1 year before Bob Dylan put out his first eponymous album. And I think I've always kind of wanted a movie like this. I've always kind of wanted a movie about the person who is good but just never achieves success, because I feel like that's what a lot of people in these creative mediums go through. That's like the majority of what the experience in this kind of life is, because let's face it, most people don't really deserve success. And Bob Dylan, I mean, he ended up writing a lot of really good original songs, but a lot of what he was doing was just covers of old standards at the time, and he honestly wasn't like really all that much better than someone like Llewyn Davis. It just happened that whatever spark he had made him come just at the right time to become this superstar when other people didn't. You can live your whole life practicing and getting better and being this, you know, this trying to achieve success, and you're not going to achieve success because that's not what success is. That's not what this is about. You know, it's not about you work hard and eventually you make it. If you make it, then you got lucky, because whatever you had at a certain moment was what was needed at that moment for this person and that person, and then, you know, it's an accident. Every time it's an accident. And that was, you know, that's an oft pointed out problem with that movie, that cheesy movie Yesterday, where the guy wakes up in a reality where the Beatles never existed and then writes all the Beatles songs and becomes a big sensation. For one thing, the covers that he did of Beatles songs were not very good. They did not have any of the charm of the actual Beatles music. So it shouldn't even have worked on that level. But also just the songs themselves became a big hit because at the time nobody had heard anything like it. The Beatles and their particular music and specific set of skills arrived at just the right time that it needed to. It doesn't make any sense that this singer-songwriter guy would just automatically become a big sensation just because he's writing Beatles songs. And that's not to say that a lot of these songs would not be hits in modern times. Like, I think if Ed Sheeran came out with Something and nobody had written it before, if he came out with that song, it would be a huge hit. But in the movie, it shows him playing I Saw Her Standing There, and that's a big hit. Like, that would... No! That is clearly a song that could only become a hit in the early 60s. It's so lame. There's a really great line that I noticed in Inside Llewyn Davis that just, when I heard it, I immediately was taken aback, like, whoa. And it happened when he's playing that song for F. Murray Abraham. And, you know, he gets to the end of it, and F. Murray Abraham says, I just don't see there's any money in this. And he's like, okay, that's it then, right? And he's like, well, I do have a position for a member of a trio. Are you good with harmonies? And he's like, no, I mean, I am, but I had a partner. And he's like, oh, I see. You should reunite with him. And what you got to understand is that his partner's dead because he committed suicide by jumping off a bridge before the movie takes place. And F. Murray Abraham doesn't know that. So he says, well, you should reunite with him. And Llewyn, his response is, that's good advice. Oh, man, that is such a good line. Oh, I actually Googled that line immediately after I heard it to see if anyone else noticed it, and it doesn't really seem like it is a famous line from that movie, but I think that should be like one of the famous movie lines. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the movie, like symbolism, and I really do like when movies do this. They kind of tell... They'll make like a very mundane story have an element of mythological significance, like with John Goodman's character, who's this, you know, heroin addict. He's never shown having an actual life. It just shows him in this car going somewhere, and we don't really know where he's going other than he's going to Chicago. We don't know why he's going there, and it's he's getting driven around by this valet who's doesn't really seem like a rich person's valet. He seems like a guy who wants to be a rich person but isn't, would hire this valet, and that's kind of the vibe that you get from John Goodman with the way he's dressed and his cane. He's like a guy with a lot of pretense who's pretending to be something. And then at the end, it's kind of left vague what even happens to him, because he has this overdose and you never see him wake up from it, but they're just driving him around, and then the valet gets arrested, and then Llewyn leaves him in the car. This character can be seen as kind of a metaphor for Llewyn himself, how Llewyn is always trying to get somewhere, but he keeps doing the same things over and over to sabotage himself on the way there, and then his life never really gets anywhere. He just keeps spinning his wheels in the mud, doing the same thing over and over. His life repeats at the end of the movie. And there's also the thing about the cat, which is very interesting, how the cat is named Ulysses. And that reminds me of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Because that's another Coen Brothers movie that is actually an adaptation of the Odyssey set in like Mississippi in the 1930s. And that movie also revolves a lot around folk music. So it's interesting that they named the cat Ulysses, and there's like almost like a kind of fourth wall breaking moment where Llewyn seems to be aware of the themes of his own story playing out, because the owners of the cat call him Ulysses, and he he kind of is like taken aback. He's like, whoa, wait, that's his name? And then it just cuts away from that scene. We don't get to see any more of it. Because this cat goes on an odyssey that we never get to see. It's this character who we don't even know what happens to him. He gets lost at one point, and then Llewyn mistakes another female cat for him, and then he gets found at the end of the movie. But there is another point where the cat shows up, and it may or may not be the same cat. We don't know. But Llewyn accidentally drives into the cat on the highway, but because he braked just in time, the cat still survives, but you can see him limping off of the road. I don't know, is there a connection here with that and the guy who punches him out in the beginning and the end of the movie, the guy who we never get to see, who doesn't have a face or a name? And then Llewyn is looking at this poster for the Disney movie The Incredible Journey, which is about dogs and cats going on this odyssey, and you can tell that he's kind of thinking about himself when he reads the tagline. So this cat gets mistaken for another cat and has this whole adventure we never get to see, and gets punched out by Llewyn's car. It really makes me think of how Llewyn is this singer with no discernible identity on the scene. People might just, can mistake him for any other singer. He doesn't really have any notoriety or presence. And he goes on this journey, this supposedly incredible journey that really isn't very incredible, but it should be, because he goes from New York to Chicago and back to New York, and nothing really happens and nothing really changes. He might as well not have even gone on the journey at all. We might as well not have even seen this happen to him. And in the end, he's just one more faceless, voiceless, anonymous who never became anything. I actually, if it turned out that this movie had been written by Charlie Kaufman, I actually would believe it, because it does kind of have a Kaufman kind of story about a sad man who's chasing something and never gets to really accomplish it. And it has these sort of almost fantasy-like elements that are very subtly sprinkled through in a way that does feel quite Kaufman-esque. There's probably a lot more that can be gleaned from watching the movie, but I've only seen it once, and I haven't read the Odyssey, so there might be something in there that could be illuminating too. But I really appreciated this one. Finally, I want to talk about James Burke. James Burke is probably the non-YouTuber who has had the biggest influence on me and the direction that I want to take my channel in as a YouTuber. I feel like James Burke is like the YouTuber who was around before YouTube, because he was making video essays, like really well-produced video essays, before the concept of a video essay even emerged, decades before it emerged. And James Burke did it better than anyone who has come along since. There's a really great clip on YouTube that I think is called like the best shot in television history or something, where it's just 13 seconds of him talking about how the technology that led to the thermos flask also was the same essential technology that allowed jet propulsion to happen. And he says this right as a rocket is being launched by NASA just behind him. And so he's like, it also created things like this. And then the rocket goes up. Just perfect timing.
If you release those two gases into a confined space with a hole at the other end of it, and mix them as you do so, and then set light to them, you get that. Destination, the moon, or Moscow.
And that kind of thing he would do on his shows all the time. He loved that kind of excellent, cinematography. Like, for instance, the beginning of The Day the Universe Changed, which is my favorite of his series. He's standing in front of a sunrise at dawn, talking about this legend about Wittgenstein, and someone, talking about how the earth is obviously round. How could people not have known that the earth is round and goes around, or that it goes around the sun, I think is what he was talking about, that the earth goes around the sun. And Wittgenstein says something clever about it. But it's just like a really well executed shot, because it's backlighting Burke with this beautiful sunrise, and you see the sun come up over the horizon as he's talking in just this one take. He could only do it in one take. Otherwise, he would have had to wait for the next day to get that sunrise again. And he delivers the monologue so perfectly. It's so thematically important that he stands in that place. And the lighting of him being backlit, and you can barely even see his face. It's just this orange silhouette of him. It's so beautiful. James Burke was really an example of people going above and beyond in terms of presentation, making absolutely poetic documentaries. And documentaries where it was essentially just him talking. Again, it was just a video essay. He would just talk about his thoughts about things that happened in history. And you get the sense while watching it that this is a guy who really has understood and synthesized a lot about the scientific and technological journey of humanity. And he also does it with such humor, and he has such a great presence. It's a comforting presence. He makes you feel intelligent while watching his stuff, and this is something that he talked about, how back then a lot of documentarians would wear suits, and they would speak in a jargon that people couldn't really understand, and so it was boring and people didn't want to watch, which is why the BBC didn't make a lot of documentaries back then, because they were afraid that people wouldn't watch them. And so the way that he managed to get around this was he wouldn't wear a suit and tie. He would wear like just a very casual suit, and he would talk in a way that made the audience feel intelligent, that made the audience feel like we were totally on board. He would just talk like a normal person, but he would talk in a way that elevated what you thought that you could accomplish as a normal person. It made you feel smarter than you were before you watched it. It felt like you were getting something and benefiting out of watching it. And it was also still accessible and presented in a way that was entertaining. He's also the guy who handled the moon landing Apollo program stuff back in the 60s for the BBC. So he had a lot of experience with that kind of thing, that kind of trying to make what was really it was rocket science. They don't call it, they don't have the cliche about rocket science for no reason. But he had to make it presentable so that your average person could understand it. Much like with Ward Kimball, when Walt Disney hired his animator Ward Kimball to host the Tomorrowland program, which dealt with a lot of that same stuff, Apollo program, science. Ward Kimball knew nothing about science. And he told that to Walt, and Walt said, "That's why you're the perfect person for this job." Same kind of thing happened with James Burke. He didn't know anything about rocket science or Apollo, but the BBC guy who was in charge of hiring the right presenter said, "Yeah, that's why you are the right person for this job." And I really like James Burke's sense of humor. I like how he injects humanity into everything. If we think about things that happened in the past, we can often, it's easy for presenters to get a bit too abstracted from the humanity of the situation and present things as very epic. But what I loved about James Burke is that every person in history who he described, he would describe things from their perspective in a way that made you feel like that person was just an ordinary human being. Even people who had wildly different perceptions of the universe from us. And that's really what his series, The Day the Universe Changed, is about. It's about how in the past, people had such wildly different imaginations of what the universe was and what it meant. And yet, through it all, we are all basically the same. We're the same species. We just have different lenses through which we view things. And so it's a very warm feeling that you get when watching these shows. You feel connected to humanity in a way that I think is hard to feel, especially when you spend so much of your time watching horrible media entertainment like the news, which is basically programming people to hate each other, programming people to not see commonalities with each other. It's almost like a spiritual experience watching a James Burke documentary, because you get a sense of connection with people in ancient China, or people in ancient Egypt, or people who are monks in a Cistercian monastery. You get connected with these people who, on a surface level, seem like they have nothing in common with you. So there's this really great sense of humanity and universality and humor that you get from James Burke, and that's what makes him, in my mind, the pinnacle of the video essay, or the pinnacle of the YouTuber, what being a YouTuber is, even though he was doing this, of course, decades before YouTube existed. And he's continued to do work since then. So in the 2000s, he was working on this project that he called Knowledge Web, which was this kind of, it was a website that was interactive, and it was basically about making connections between things, like he did in his book, The Pinball Effect, right here, like what he did with this book, where he basically indexes different things and gets you to think in a connective way by connecting things that you wouldn't have thought go together, but they actually do, historically. And this is also what his first series, Connections, was about, and he ended up doing 2 more series of Connections later on in the late 90s. It was either late 90s or early 2000s, or both, I can't remember. And so Knowledge Web was kind of his attempt to do connections on the internet. He had done it in book form, he'd done it in TV form, now it's website form. But of course, it can be kind of difficult to create a website, actually. Not everyone is able to do it, and even the people he had working with him in the James Burke Foundation, I think it's called, it just didn't get off the ground. They made a beta version eventually. I think for a long time they didn't even have the beta out, and it was, I couldn't even see it. But recently I checked back and saw that there was a beta version available. But then he tried a few years later, in I think 2017, 2016, to make another version of this same concept, but this time as a phone app, and it was going to be called Connections. And he basically, his idea was that he wanted to combine the knowledge web with Wikipedia, which is kind of already what I was thinking, because Wikipedia already has that whole hyperlink system where if you're reading a Wikipedia article, you can connect things that you didn't think were connected by clicking on the hyperlinks. And there's a whole game about it where you have to get from like, you have to press the random article generator on Wikipedia and then like, how do we get from here to Hitler? And see if you can do it in 6 clicks or less. And it's actually always possible pretty much to get to whatever you want in less than 10 clicks. And so I used to do that all the time in high school. And so when I heard about the knowledge web, I kind of was like, well, don't we already kind of have that with Wikipedia? But knowledge web is different because it is built around connective thinking. And so it will specifically pull out connections that you wouldn't have thought of and present them to you and show how they're connected. And so basically we wanted to take that software and then combine it with Wikipedia. That would have been the Connections app. And it looks like it got, let me see how far it got in the Kickstarter. Yeah, looks like it got $25,000 out of a $75,000 goal, so it failed. But with all this, with the knowledge web, with Connections, the app, it kind of makes me wonder, like, are they overthinking the amount of overhead that they need here? I mean, I don't really know much about web development or app development, but I feel like so many people can just make an app these days that I wonder, like, what exactly they need all these resources for. Like, maybe back in the 2000s, making a website was kind of difficult, but I don't know, would it be that difficult now? I guess the problem really comes with what is required to make all those connections, which is what the app is about. It's that connective thinking. I don't know, you need some kind of an AI or some kind of, or just a bunch of man hours in order to do that. It's an interesting idea, this idea of promoting connective thinking among people with an app like this. I don't know how interesting it would have been to actually use the app, but it was a cool idea, so it's kind of a shame that it never happened. But anyway, that's it for this episode of RAB Roundup. Have a good day.